My name is John, and I've been cheated on by two different ladies, both of whom I believe to be the love of my life, or what you might call my soulmates. Let me start by saying that the first woman to enter my life ruined everything. I was a person who put forth a lot of effort to provide for my family and tried to make ends meet. I was blessed with a wonderful wife and two adorable boys. At least, that's how I interpreted her at the time I was thinking about her, because I was unable to determine the motivation behind her meaningless confrontations with me. I usually tried to see the humorous side of the situation by assuming that she was overworked from her household responsibilities. Because life was so difficult, I had to put every dime I made towards getting my family the basics of nutrition and shelter. After a certain point in time, I started having uncomfortable feelings and noticing some odd symptoms. I made the decision to go to the local clinic by myself because I was concerned about my health, and since I was the only income earner in the family. My sons were 12 and 10 at the time, and I did not want my wife to be concerned about me. My doctor told me that I had chlamydia, a sexually transmitted infection, after running a battery of tests to determine whether or not I had it. I was bewildered and shocked because I was unable to comprehend how I could have gotten such an infection. The physician started by inquiring about my sexual behavior, mainly wanting to know if I had more than one partner at a time. My response, which was tinged with frustration, was that I don't even have enough money to feed my family properly. How could I possibly afford to have numerous sex partners at the same time? The physician, who I believe misunderstood the nature of my predicament, speculated that I might have sought out the companionship of prostitutes. I promptly emphasized the situation, that I am having financial difficulties and that I am unable to afford any such pleasures. The physician, intent on determining the origin of the infection, inquired as to whether or not I had a history of chlamydia in the past. I was being completely honest when I said that I had no history of infection, and I was baffled as to how this could have taken place. The physician offered a potential remedy in an effort to explain the riddle and stop the spread of the infection. He suggested that my wife also get a physical examination. The thought made me a little uneasy, since I was aware that it would be difficult to persuade my wife to take the exam, and I wanted very much for her to do so. When I got home, I discovered that my wife was looking after our children by herself. After gathering up my strength, I told her the news in a calm and collected manner. The news of the diagnosis caused her to flush, and I was instantly aware of her anxiety as a result of this change. However, when I informed her that the doctor wanted her to be examined since he could not determine the underlying reason for my illness, he wanted to know why. To my astonishment, my wife's response was negative right away. As she made the defensive gesture of crossing her arms, her eyes widened with a mixture of surprise and defensiveness. Indignantly, she shot out, "Why would you even suggest such a thing?" Her tone was tinged with disbelief as she spoke. "Do you not believe me? How could you possibly imagine that I would cheat on you?" Her defensive response caught me off guard. I was surprised. My objective was to look out for both of our interests, not to level any sort of accusation against her. On the other hand, the fact that she refused to even consider getting tested served only to strengthen my suspicions. My confidence in our once unshakable link began to waver as doubt crept into my head, because if she had nothing to hide, she would have gone for the test right away. As the days progressed into weeks, so did the tension that existed between us. It appeared that the affection and trust that had been cultivated between us over the years were dissipating. My persistent uncertainty made our partnership feel like it was under the weight of a tremendous burden. I was unable to shake the uneasy sensation that something was wrong. I came up with a scheme one night, and after a particularly quiet supper, I approached her with a mixture of guilt and sorrowful looks to call false truce. My goal was to get her to relax her guard a little bit more than she had been doing for the past several days. I had no choice but to engage in that drama, since it was the only way I could discover the truth. It took me weeks to restore her trust. But once I did, I began my treatment without notifying her. At the same time, I began to keep my distance from her in bed, owing to her questionable position. I did not want to put my health in danger for a worthless woman who could not be faithful even after years of marriage. I also came to the conclusion that everything was right in front of me, but I had failed to notice it for the simple reason that I had never considered the possibility that my wife was cheating on me. After all, how could I have been so naive? After having kids and being strapped for cash? She never even allowed me to touch her phone. And she always had an explanation ready whenever I pointed out something new she was wearing, such as the fact that a friend had lent her this or that item for a few days. I never thought to ask her how she managed to become such a close friend. I couldn't believe how foolish I'd been all my life. Did not realize the period of time she had been unfaithful to me. I continued monitoring her phone after she dozed off, and it took me a few days before I eventually found a message from her lover in her inbox. Of course, she had forgotten to delete the message before she passed out, but I found it nonetheless. To find out how to look for someone on the internet in this day and age, I asked one of my coworkers who was younger than me for assistance. Then I started digging, and finally, I got the details of my wife's affair partner, who is married and appeared to be having a good life on social media. My first thought about it was that I should have contacted his wife. But then I thought about what I would say to her. So instead, I decided to start gathering evidence that would prove his affair with my wife. I approached my young colleague once more and learned how to follow anyone's messages. However, when he asked about my purpose, I had to tell him the truth about my suspicions regarding my wife. As a result, he informed me about bugs, and that night, when I arrived back home, I eagerly waited for her to go to sleep. I made sure that she was sound asleep, and then I grabbed her phone and installed a bug so that all of her calls and messages would come to my phone also. The following morning, I started receiving her texts on my phone as well, which were actually sent by her lover. I learned that they were going to get together, and the time that they chose was one of their typical times. However, I was unaware of when they typically got together. Now that I had just half the information, I was more motivated than ever to collect evidence against both of them. What I would do with that knowledge would be something I would consider later. The following morning, I got up and went about my normal routine. I walked up and then hid at a distance to observe her. My children were off to their respective schools. I waited a few more minutes, and then she emerged from the door wearing something completely new, something she had never worn for me before. They even paid for their own respective halves of the hotel room. And as a result, I now have a better idea of how and where she spends the money I work so hard to obtain. I followed her all the way to the hotel, and when she arrived there, she was hiding her identity by covering her face with a scarf and wearing large goggles when she stepped out of the car. I saw her. Her lover was waiting for her outside, and upon her arrival, he opened the door to her cab. He pulled her close to kiss her, but she started seeing left and right. After that, they shared a passionate kiss. I was not prepared to capture those torturous views. But with my hands trembling in rage, I captured their kiss, and then they went inside. I followed them till they entered their room, and I was completely prepared to catch them in the act. However, at that same time, my phone began to ring, and when I looked at it, I saw a message from my wife that had been sent from another number. I was taken aback by this information. I had the intention of catching my wife in the act and saving that poor woman, who was my wife's affair partner's wife, from the illness that I was suffering from. But I was unable to do so since my wife was having an affair with more than one man. I stifled my rage, abandoned my strategy, and walked out of the hotel because there was no purpose in getting involved with the conflict at this time. I took a seat on a bench by the road and thought about how I could exact retribution on her for betraying me. I resolved that I would not give her the satisfaction of getting away so easily. I sobbed my eyes out, but after that, I put all of my energy into formulating a plan to exact vengeance on whoever had wronged me. I continued to receive her texts for around 1 month, and I carefully noted down each and every number that she was getting messages and calls from. When I was sure that these were all the total number of men my wife was having an affair with, one evening, I reached for her phone and sent a text message to her numerous banging partners, inviting them to come to my place the next day at the usual time that they meet. Before I kept her phone, I deleted that invitation message. During these months, my wife did not make an effort to inquire about my illness, which had in fact been passed on to me by her. I also discovered that she had no friends and that she received all of her new belongings from all the men with whom she was having an affair, and she spent my hard-earned money on her own enjoyment. I was trying to fall asleep with all of these ideas racing through my head, but I couldn't because I was wide awake, waiting for the morning to arrive so that I could witness her being humiliated by each and every one of her affair partners. I feigned to be sick first thing in the morning so I could get out of going to work, and instead I stayed in bed all day. After my sons had left the location, I impatiently began waiting for all 6 men to arrive. I was looking forward to seeing her once she found out that I was aware of those individuals who shared her bed with her. As soon as my doorbell rang, I jumped to my feet and stormed out of the room. When she opened the door, her face turned precisely the same color as when I requested that she have herself tested. I questioned her by inquiring who was there at the door. Therefore, she did not respond, but rather she began to see both me and the other man one at a time. Because of this, she did not have enough time to process the presence of her one man before another person arrived at the door and questioned the other man. "Who are you?" I was standing inside right next to her and asking, "Who are they?" Then the other 2 came, and they all asked each other how they were linked to my wife. After one of them announced that he was her boyfriend, everyone turned their attention to her and glanced at her suspiciously. I could tell by the way she was sweating that she was going to shut the door. So I pushed my way in and announced, "I actually sent you guys the message from last night." She was drenched in confusion. She stared at me in shock, and I told her that I am aware of everything, and that what I had just done was merely a teaser of what I am going to do in the future. Someone from among them inquired, "Who are you?" Then I screamed that I am the husband of this characterless bitch, and that she was just taking advantage of all of you just like she took mine. This was the reason I texted you all. And just like her, you all are jerks, and you all have girlfriends or wives, because I have the details of each and every one of you. You all deserved to end up with an insensitive woman like this. And this inhumane woman deserves all of you. She was sobbing and yelling at me to stop, but the neighbors heard 6 men arguing outside our front door, and then heard me shouting. So more people came to see what was going on. I lost control of my rage and said that yes, my wife had been sleeping with all of these 6 men, and today I invited them all so that they could all meet each other, and I will tell you all that I got chlamydia because of her. Ultimately, all thanks go to one of you who injected that infection in her, and she transmitted it to me. According to one of them, she trapped us and secretly worked with her husband to blackmail us. I grabbed her by the arm and dragged her over to them. Then I told them, "She does not belong here. You can take her anywhere and ask whatever you all want to because she has had time all of her life." I was unaware that hours had passed, and when my sons arrived home, they found the front of our house full of men, and they questioned me about what had happened. I did not want to upset my children. So I took them inside, and when they asked about their mother, I dragged her inside as well. Then I yelled at all of them to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. "What exactly is going on, Dad?" My 2 sons were curious. Then, because I did not want to keep them in the dark, and because they were old enough to comprehend why their parents were getting a divorce, I gave them the entire story. I also informed them that after the divorce, their mother was not going to get anything because cheaters did not get anything in this state. Therefore, if they wanted to live with them, they should have been aware of all the facts. And if they want to continue living here, they will have to learn to live without their mother since she is going to leave in the next few minutes. She was crying the whole time and was even unable to voice a single word. When my youngest son questioned her about why on earth she did all of this to a happy family, she had nothing to say in her defense. She merely expressed regret admitted that she had made a grave error, and stated that all she wanted was a do-over. I could see by the look on their faces that they wanted me to give their mother another chance. So I informed them in no uncertain terms that wasn't going to happen, and I added that I was going to go for a walk. But when I got back, I wanted this cheater out of my house. I turned back as I was leaving and stated to those who were there, "If any of you want to go with her, you can go. I won't cut my ties with them, as they will always be my offspring." That walk was the most difficult one I've ever had to do, since I know that when I get home, things won't be the same. I've been able to keep my composure up to this point. But everything has finally come to an end. I risked losing my boys in this act of vengeance. But nonetheless, there was nothing else I could do but face the music that life was playing. The instant I went back home, my sons were waiting for me to inform them that they wanted to live with me. This had been going on for about 7 months, and it was the first time in a while that I felt truly content within myself. The next day, I filed for divorce. When my wife and I arrived at the courthouse for the divorce settlement, the mood was restricted and heavy with feelings that had not been resolved. When we stood before the court, our eyes briefly locked. But where there was previously fondness and familiarity in that stare, there was neither of those things present. My wife took a moment to compose herself and gather her strength before breaking the silence at the beginning of the proceedings. She apologized once more, this time with a voice that was shaking, for the actions that she had taken that led to the end of their marriage. Her tone conveyed a sense of both remorse and optimism, as if she were genuinely hoping for forgiveness and a chance at a new beginning. Despite this, I didn't waver in my determination or my resolve. The betrayal caused a great deal of suffering, and the wounds were in no way close to being healed. We had reached a point where it seemed as though forgiveness was impossible to achieve, since the trust that had previously held them together had been permanently broken. It was impossible to continue living in the same house after everything that had transpired, because others in the neighborhood started glancing at us with suspicious expressions. So, for the sake of my children's mental health, I decided to sell my home after the divorce and go to a different city. With half of the money I received from the sale, I purchased a tiny flat, and with the other half, I set up my own little business. Because I did not insist that my children get in touch with their mother, I am unable to confirm whether or not they did so. I took the courageous step of deciding that we should uproot our lives and relocate to a different city. It was a leap of faith that was motivated by the aspiration to begin a new chapter in my life and build a brighter future for myself and my sons. The first several years spent in the strange city were fraught with difficulties and obstacles at every turn. Starting a business from nothing is never an easy task, and growing my company to a size where it could be profitable required me to put in a lot of effort, stay persistent, and lose a lot of sleep over the course of 4 long years. My journey through life has not always been easy for me. I had been married for 18 years when I found myself trying to untangle the strands of a relationship that had ended. Scars that ran deep were left behind after the faith that I had once placed in my relationship was betrayed. And the idea of ever being interested in getting married again appeared to be completely out of the question. The doors to my heart have shut themselves off, guarding themselves against any additional hurt. The devotion I have for my sons and the hope that I may secure and enrich their future have become the compass points on which I base my decisions in life. Unanticipated friendships developed as the journey progressed. Then, slowly but surely, love crept back into my life like a soft breeze that murmurs through the leaves of the trees. At least, that's what I believe to be the case. Despite the fact that my ex-wife had dumped me, I should not have been so foolish again in my life and refused my gut feelings to trust a woman again. Due to the agony of previous betrayals, self-doubt had worked its way into the very fabric of my existence and had become an essential component of my psyche. My ability to trust completely was hindered when I entered my second marriage, and the feeling of uncertainty crept into my consciousness like an uninvited guest. In the beginning, I found myself having many moments of skepticism toward my second wife, silently questioning every action and intention that she made. But I was adamant about concealing this quality, as I wanted to spare her the torment of bearing the weight of my mistrust. I would sneakily check her phone in the darkness of the night while she was soundly sleeping, looking for any indications that she was being dishonest. I went to such lengths as to follow her stealthily, in the hopes of unearthing any secrets or hidden realities. Despite this, she consistently demonstrated her unwavering resolve, as evidenced by the fact that her actions were consistent with the statements that she made. She would go to work with devotion and concentration, and on the way home, she would not take any unusual routes or engage in any questionable behavior. Something unexpected started to become apparent to me as the days changed into weeks, and the weeks evolved into months as time passed. My wife was able to effortlessly develop a relationship with both of my sons, but especially with my eldest son. They did not put up any protest about her being a part of our lives, and instead welcomed her as an indispensable member of our family. Her connection with my boys helped me begin dismantling the fortress of self-doubt that I had constructed around myself. Finally, one day I entered my house without the burden of any concerns, but I was unable to spot anyone in the hallway. When I was walking towards my bedroom, I started to hear my sons mumbling and moaning, and as I drew closer, I realized that whispers were coming from my son's room. I assumed that my son must have brought a female home with him, so I walked back from his room. However, as I did so, I heard my wife scream out loud and call my son's name in an improper manner. I was not prepared for what I saw when I sneaked into the room, since I was unable to stop myself from doing it. My eldest's DE was inside her butt. Although I had experienced some of it before, the portion involving my son was something I had never done before. I did not completely break down as I did the first time I was hurt because of someone else's adultery. I used my phone once again to record my wife's infidelity. But this time, I also captured my son lying to me about something. When they were done, they were out of breath and embracing each other in their arms while they were undressed. After my son inquired as to what time I would be returning home today, she looked at the clock and responded that there were still 2 hours left. I honestly did not notice that I arrived early today since, for the very first time in years, I was not doubting anyone. However, the universe had other plans for me, and I came here earlier than expected. After that, they discussed how my son had actually told her about my prior spying techniques and how I had caught my wife, which is why my second wife and my son had been careful from the beginning. My wife said that it could be simpler for them to have their sexual encounters in a public place like a hotel. But my son responded that you don't know my father, and that he is more likely to let his spying guard down inside the house than he is outside, because he had bugged my mother's phone and gathered information that may be used against her. I had forbidden you to have any kind of discussion with me over the phone for this precise reason. My wife stated that she did not know she was marrying a detective because I appeared to be a simple man. My son retorted that his father is actually a very simple man, and that he got cheated by his first wife after 18 years of marriage. And look at us now. I am banging his second wife. I mean, who could ever trust again in his life after such a big betrayal? My wife speculated that perhaps my son inherited some of his father's genes, as well as some of his mother's genes, because he inherited a trait of treachery from his mother, but was able to conceal this trait of betrayal from his father. When she asked my son what he thought about betraying his father, he told her that it was never in his plans to do so because he had no control over when she seduced him. And after the first time, there was no going back for him. Then she said that she did not marry his father with the intention of betraying him. Nevertheless, after she saw his son, she began to regret her decision to marry a guy who was 15 years older than she was. And as time went on, she found that she was unable to suppress her attraction for the boy, near her age. Their chat actually made my job easier because they admitted everything in my recordings, when, in reality, they were just having casual conversations after they had satisfied their hunger for one another. My wife asked him how long they would have to continue doing everything behind closed doors, to which he immediately responded, forever, because he had never promised anything to her, and he could not afford to stand up to his father because he did not want his father to disown him as he had done with his mother. Then she inquired about his other brother, asking what he would do if their awkward little secret became public knowledge. My son said that he would never support his brother, and that was the reason why he never shared this secret with him. In addition, it was becoming difficult for him to keep this secret from his brother because they do everything else in life together except for this. I had gathered sufficient proof, and when I heard them stand up, I realized that it was almost time for me to return. So I quietly exited the house and made my way to my office. I have no idea how many hours I spent by myself because I was unable to interact with anyone outside of my room. It was the second time that someone I cared about had ditched me, but this time I was furious with myself because I hadn't paid enough attention to my intuition. Instead, my kid managed to make me look like an idiot. My vengeful side awoke once again, and I spent the entire night in my office, going over all of the paperwork associated with my assets and checking my will in great detail. Fortunately for me, I relocated to another part of the country, and the laws in this area state that cheats are not entitled to any financial support in the event of a divorce. I changed my will over the phone with my solicitors, but I instructed them on a more serious note. In fact, I threatened them that if anything was to get leaked outside of this room, they would be held accountable for it. I did exactly what my traitor's son feared would happen, and that was to disown him. However, I was also plotting how to divulge all of this information. After stabbing me in the back, I won't make it easy for them to escape. The next morning, I got a call from my scheming wife, and she asked me about the night I spent working at the office the night before. I swallowed my rage and told her that I was busy and that it was possible that work might require me to travel outside of the city. I did not want to be around my wife and my son in order to prevent them from picking up on anything related to the way I was acting. She informed me that the week following is our wedding anniversary, and she asked me if I would be at home until then or not. I didn't respond to her question, but I did tell her that I would talk with her when I returned home from work. As soon as she brought up the subject of our wedding anniversary, a flood of vengeful thoughts started running through my head. I decided to remain in my office for a few more hours so that I might come up with a plan to gratify myself by publicly shaming two morons. I walked out of my workplace and made my way back home, since this time around, I did not need to keep eyes on anyone because I had enough material to insult them. I was unable to emotionally separate myself from my wife for no apparent reason. And if I failed to conceal my objectives, my enemies would have an easier time fleeing after betraying me. I can't afford to take any chances, so as soon as I arrived back at my house, I filled them in on my unexpected travel outside of the city for work. After I told them about it after dinner, the bitch, being the perfect wife that she is, offered to assist me in packing. I did not accept her assistance because I did not want her to touch any of my belongings. I began to feel unpleasant around her. After that, my son asked who had his cheating mother's genes. Exactly what I was thinking about for our wedding anniversary. I had the strong need to seize him by the scruff of the neck and hurl him out of my life. But instead, I forced a grin and told him that you and your stepmother would be responsible for organizing this celebration because I would be absent during that time. The instantaneous response he gave was, "Come on, Dad. Don't call her my mom." I gave a little shrug and continued. "I didn't call her your mom. I called her your stepmother because she's actually your stepmother, no matter how friendly your bond would be." I explained further why I had referred to her as your stepmother rather than your mother. Then I turned to look at my wife, and I emphasized to her that her son would assist her with the celebration preparations. Both of them began to behave as though they were experiencing discomfort as a result of my referring to them as son and stepmother. I asked my younger son's view on the matter, and he told me that although he has been calling my wife by her name from the very beginning of their relationship, he still considers her to be his stepmother. I cut my supper short and excused them so that I could pack for my upcoming trip after hearing the views of my younger kid. I had finished my packing in the blink of an eye and stormed out of the house because of what I had done on the dining table by putting more emphasis on my son and stepmother and I did not want to do any additional things so that they would both notice it. I did not stay at home in order to make hotel reservations. After leaving the house, I immediately began searching online for hotel rooms. I started keeping track of the number of days until my wedding anniversary, and I made multiple phone calls to my attorneys, pressuring them to speed up the process since I need my new formal will, and I was given a divorce summons for my wife on the day of our anniversary. I hoped that it would come as a shock to them. I asked my son to invite all of his friends to the party, and I also asked him in secret to put up a projector at the party. I wanted to throw a surprise for my wife by playing our wonderful wedding images. The day had arrived, but I was still missing the documents that I required, despite the fact that my attorneys had assured me that everything would be in my possession in an hour. I started working on a movie that I meant to play in front of all of the guests as soon as I opened my laptop and got to work. As soon as I had all of the paperwork, I went over it, and it was written that I disowned my elder son from all inheritance due to his betrayal, and that if my second son would do something like that, he would also be disowned by me, and after my death, everything would go into the trust. Then I opened the subsequent piece of mail, which turned out to be a divorce petition. I crammed it into my bag and checked out of the hotel as soon as I could. By the time I got back home, all of my guests had come, and they were waiting for me. I apologized for arriving late to my own party. Then I signaled my son to ask about the projector, and he was the one who showed me where it was located. I told my audience before I started playing a video that this one was for my wife. This all happened as soon as my video got started, and I began to listen to whispers and murmuring from the guests. My wife started screaming because she knew what was going to happen in the video. And my son came up to me and started explaining that the real offender was my wife because she started seducing him. And he was innocent the whole time. When I humiliated my first wife 4 years ago, I felt the same sense of adrenaline when I watched my son and my wife go through what they're going through right now. Before I spoke to my son after what he had said, the moment of the video where he called me an idiot or a simpleton came on. At that point, it was pointless for me to say anything else, so I directed him to watch the video. I then handed them some documents that were intended for them once the film had finished playing. I served a divorce summons on my wife and a disownment paper on my son, and then I informed everyone that the drama was over and that they could all leave at this time. My disgraceful son came to me and asked how I could possibly know about this, because he was being so careful all the time. He also asked why I couldn't disown him, because he was my offspring. I responded by saying that no, you are not my offspring, that you are truly the son of your treacherous mother, and that it is difficult for genes like that to remain faithful to their relationship. My youngest kid approached me and asked, again, do we need to move to another city? To which I responded, no. This time I won't move, meaning that I would not move. I've come to the conclusion that I have committed no wrongdoing, and as a result, I have no need to be afraid of confronting other people. As a result, I plan to continue living in the same city and in the same house. I also stated that moving to a new city had been a mistake that I had made in the past. I am not going to make that mistake again since, at that time, I was accountable for both of your mental health. But I should have stayed there because I had not done anything wrong now or at that time. Update. I have come to the realization that perhaps God has endowed me with a vengeful nature because 2 heartbreaks and a betrayal were predetermined in my destiny. I am currently in my 50s and I manage a thriving business. Most people think that I am lucky, but no one understands what I have been through in my personal life. No matter what challenges life presents, I instilled in my son the importance of keeping a positive attitude and facing challenges head-on. I experienced the same sense of relief that I had when I finally got rid of my first infidelity after getting a divorce settlement and threw out my older one.